Okay, so you sent in a really interesting bunch of stuff, and it all kind of comes back to this one book, Inner Questioning.
Yeah.
And I think what's so cool about this is that it's really about like, how asking ourselves the right questions can be like such a powerful tool, like in all these different areas of life.
Right. And it's not just theoretical. The author Sasaki Tsuneo, he's got this background. Like he went to Tokyo University, he was a company president, and he's even lectured at some really big universities.
Wow.
But what really makes this resonate is that he's also been through a lot personally. Raising a kid with autism, supporting his wife through some serious health issues and depression.
Yeah.
So it's wisdom that comes from experience.
It's not just coming from like some ivory tower somewhere.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's get into it. You want to know like how can you actually use these ideas from Sasaki's book?
Right.
So we're going to try to like pull out the most practical stuff from it, like how this whole thing about self-questioning can actually help you live a more fulfilling and happier life.
Yeah.
Whether it's at work, in your relationships with your family, even like when you're thinking about money or your future.
And it feels so relevant now, doesn't it? I mean, the book talks about how crazy and unpredictable things are these days.
Yeah.
Like new generations facing so much uncertainty, and then you've got AI changing everything so fast.
Right, like it feels like the rules are constantly changing.
Yeah, exactly. But Sasaki's point is that even with all that, our ability to ask questions, to really think deeply about things, that's what makes us human.
Yeah, that sets us apart.
And that's a skill that's super valuable no matter what's happening around us.
So let's jump into part one,
Mm.
the whole idea of the power of questioning and self-reflection.
Okay.
So the book starts with this really basic but important idea, the ability to ask questions. That's what makes us different.
Yeah.
Not just from animals, but even from AI.
Right.
Because AI can only answer the questions that it's programmed to answer, right?
It's limited.
But we can come up with completely new questions, and that's what unlocks new understanding.
And what's so cool is that by learning to ask the right questions, those really deep, insightful ones, we can get a much clearer perspective on things.
Yeah, like you could see the bigger picture.
Exactly. And it's not just about reacting to what happens. It's about proactively trying to understand.
And I think it gets to this feeling that we've all had where we feel stuck.
Oh, for sure.
And the book suggests that a lot of times, it's not that we don't have the answers. It's that we haven't even figured out the right question to ask.
That's so true.
So learning how to ask the right questions, that helps us define the problem. And once you understand the problem, that's half the battle, right?
Absolutely. And it's interesting because the book also talks about this cultural aspect.
Oh, yeah.
Like sometimes people are afraid to ask questions.
Because they don't want to look stupid.
Yeah, or maybe they don't want to rock the boat.
Right.
There's this pressure to just go along with things, do things the way they've always been done. Look for the standard answers.
Follow the script.
Right. But Sasaki is saying that in a world where things are changing all the time and there aren't always clear-cut answers, asking questions to find your own way forward, that's what's really important.
And this is where it gets really interesting. The book puts a lot of emphasis on inner thinking.
Inner thinking.
Yeah, like it's so important now, especially after the pandemic.
Right.
Because all the old ways of doing things, all the old benchmarks, they might not be relevant anymore.
Yeah, everything's different.
So we need to get good at using our own judgment, our own inner questions to figure out what to do.
It's about trusting yourself.
Yeah, and to really illustrate this point, Sasaki talks about his own life.
Oh, that's always interesting.
So he was a section chief at this company, Toray Industries.
Okay.
And he was going through so much. His wife was sick. He had 3 young kids, and one of them had autism.
Oh, wow.
And then later on, he even faced being downsized, even though he was working so hard.
That's a lot to handle.
I know, it's so much pressure. And so how did he deal with all of that?
What did he do?
He turned inward.
Yeah.
He started asking himself these really important questions.
Like what?
Like, what does it really mean to be a good section chief? How can I motivate my team? And how do I balance all of this work with my responsibilities at home?
Yeah, that work-life balance struggle is so real.
It's a constant battle. And so this process of self-questioning, that's how he found his way through all of it.
That makes sense.
And this leads to a really practical tool that he talks about, the plan, do, see cycle.
Plan, do, see.
Yeah, it's this basic approach to work that a lot of people use.
Okay.
But he says that the see part, the reflection part, that's what people often forget about.
Oh, that's interesting.
But that's where the real learning happens,
Yeah.
It's about looking back and figuring out why things happen the way they did, and then coming up with a plan to do better next time.
So it's not just about doing, it's about learning from what you've done.
Exactly. And he even tells this story from early in his career where he made some mistakes, and his boss gave him some pretty harsh feedback.
Hmm.
But instead of just getting upset about it, he took the time to think about what went wrong.
Good for him.
And he realized that he often wasn't prepared enough and he was rushing things.
Oh, I do that sometimes.
So his solution was actually pretty simple. He started spending more time preparing and he started writing things down very carefully.
Huh. So basic, but important.
And it worked. It shows how self-questioning can help you find simple but effective solutions.
I like that.
And this connects to another big idea that the book talks about, which is that being good at problem solving through questioning.
Yeah.
That's actually more valuable than just having a bunch of skills.
So it's not just about what you know, it's about how you think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Skills are important, but being able to really analyze a situation, ask the right questions, and come up with a solution, that's what makes a difference.
That's what sets people apart.
And the book also talks about this idea of finding your aspiration in your work.
Desperation.
Yeah, it's not just about going to work and doing your job. It's about finding something that makes you excited to be there.
Like having a purpose.
Exactly. And that starts by asking yourself, what really matters to me in my work?
It's about finding meaning in what you do.
And one piece of advice that I think is really helpful is to never be afraid to ask questions when you're not sure about something.
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't matter how old you are or how experienced you are, if you don't know something, ask.
Just ask.
And Sasaki tells this story about when he was transferred to a new role where he was in charge of restructuring a bunch of companies.
Restructuring sounds complicated.
It is, and he had no experience with it.
So what did he do?
Well, his first question wasn't even about restructuring. It was, who should I ask when I have a question?
Haha, so he started by figuring out who the expert was.
Exactly, and that's so important. Knowing who to ask is the first step.
It's about finding the right resources.
And from that, he developed this idea of strategic questioning.
Strategic questioning.
Yeah, it's not just asking any question. It's about thinking carefully about who to ask and how to ask.
So it's like planning your questions.
And he also says that it's important to be honest about why you're asking.
Like explain what you're trying to figure out.
Yeah, because that builds trust and makes people more willing to help you.
That makes sense.
Okay, so moving on to part 2, we're going to get into the practical applications of questioning in work and life.
Okay, let's get practical.
And one thing that I know a lot of people worry about is how to be more efficient at work.
Yeah, everybody wants to be more efficient.
And the book actually addresses this head on. It talks about the concern that people have about their work speed.
Okay.
And it challenges this idea that if you work slowly, it means you're not good at your job.
Oh, that's a common fear?
So instead of just assuming that you're slow, the book suggests this interesting idea of imitating successful methods.
Imitating.
Yeah, why try to come up with something new from scratch when you can learn from what's already working?
It's like learning from the best.
Exactly. And they give this example of an editor who was having trouble getting his book proposals approved. And his editor-in-chief suggested that instead of trying to be super original all the time,
Yeah.
he should study best-selling books and try to figure out what made them successful.
Interesting.
And you know what? The project that he developed using this imitation strategy, it was approved and it became a bestseller.
Wow. So imitation can actually lead to success.
It's not about copying. It's about learning and adapting.
It's about understanding the principles behind what works.
Exactly. And Sasaki himself found this really helpful when he had to organize this really messy archive.
Oh, an archive. That sounds like a nightmare.
It was. And instead of starting from scratch, he looked for patterns and templates in the documents that were already well organized.
That's smart.
And that saved him so much time and effort.
So it's about working smarter, not harder.
Exactly. And the point is that combining this kind of smart imitation with your own ideas, that's often more effective than constantly trying to be innovative.
Because sometimes the tried and true methods, they work for a reason.
Exactly. And the book also really emphasizes the importance of personal record keeping.
Record keeping.
Yeah, like taking notes on important information, writing down what you learned from your mistakes, saving inspiring quotes.
It's like creating your own personal knowledge base.
And it's so valuable to have that to refer back to, you know.
Yeah, because you can learn from your past experiences.
And Sasaki specifically recommends writing things down by hand.
By hand.
Yeah, he says it helps you remember things better.
That's interesting.
So next time you learn something important, write it down.
I should try that.
Okay, so here's another interesting idea from the book.
What's that?
To make work more enjoyable, they suggest, I'm trying to think of like a game.
A game.
Yeah, Sasaki gives this example of how he turned budget forecasting, which is usually pretty boring.
Yeah, budgets are not the most exciting thing.
into a competition between his different teams.
Oh, that's clever.
And he gave rewards to the teams that made the most accurate predictions.
So he gamified it.
And it made it more fun and engaging for everyone.
That's cool, and it probably made them better at forecasting, too.
Exactly. And he takes this idea even further. He suggests using this prediction game approach to understand people, too.
People?
Yeah, like pay attention to your first impressions of people you meet.
Okay.
And then over time, as you get to know them, better revise your impressions.
So it's like you're constantly updating your assessments.
Exactly. And he compares it to a horse racing game.
Right.
Where you're trying to predict who's going to win.
That's a funny analogy.
But it makes sense, right?
Yeah, I can see that.
And he even suggests using this approach with difficult bosses.
Oh, that's interesting.
Like observe their behavior, try to figure out their patterns, and then you can kind of anticipate how they're going to react to things.
So it's about being strategic in your interactions.
Exactly. And it can make those interactions a lot smoother.
That's really helpful.
Okay. So another common challenge at work is when you're given a new task and you might feel a little anxious about it.
Oh, yeah. New things can be scary.
And the book warns against trying to be too clever or skipping steps just because you want to get started quickly.
Right. Sometimes it's better to slow down and make sure you're doing things right.
And it emphasizes this really basic but important point, which is to confirm all the key details with your boss or whoever gave you the task.
Like what kind of details?
Like deadlines, specific requirements, what resources are available, things like that.
Oh, yeah. That's important.
And it's not just about confirming things at the beginning.
Okay, you mean you should check in throughout the project?
Exactly. Keep verifying the facts and the situation as you go.
Because things can change.
And that also helps to keep everyone informed about your progress.
So it's good communication, too.
And the book also makes this interesting point about how facts aren't always as straightforward as they seem.
What do you mean?
Well, what you might think is a fact could just be one interpretation of reality.
Oh, I see.
And you might even get conflicting advice from different people in authority.
That's confusing.
It can be. And so it's important to pay attention to how people think and what perspectives they bring.
Do you need to consider the source?
And this leads to another really important idea that the book challenges, which is this assumption that faster is always better.
Oh, yeah. We're always told to hurry up.
But the book argues that sometimes it's actually better to slow down and think things through before you jump into action.
Because if you rush, you might make mistakes.
Exactly. And then you have to go back and fix them, which takes even more time.
So taking the time to plan can actually save you time in the long run.
And Sasaki talks about how he got really serious about efficiency when he was trying to balance work and family life.
Oh, that's a tough one.
And he realized that sometimes less is more.
Less is more.
Yeah, like getting rid of unnecessary tasks can free up time for the things that really matter.
It's about prioritizing.
And he also stresses the importance of understanding deadlines and planning your work strategically.
So don't just work longer hours. Work smarter.
And he even suggests that it's okay to ask for help or even outsource some tasks if that allows you to focus on your most important responsibilities.
That's a good point. Sometimes we try to do too much ourselves.
And finally, in this section, the book talks about how to deal with unexpected personnel changes at work.
Okay.
So instead of seeing these changes as negative, it encourages you to think of them as opportunities for growth.
Even if you're initially disappointed.
And Sasaki tells this story about how he was moved to a sales department, even though his background was in planning.
That's a big change.
It was. But he later realized that it was a really valuable learning experience.
So it's about being open to new things.
And when you do find yourself in a new role, especially if you're more experienced, the book emphasizes the importance of humility and a willingness to learn.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to ask questions.
Exactly. Sasaki tells about how he was transferred to the plastics division and he knew nothing about plastics.
Oh, wow.
But he focused on learning the basics. And he wasn't afraid to ask what might seem like dumb questions.
That takes humility.
And it worked. He says that being humble and working hard is much more effective than pretending you know everything.
It's about being honest with yourself and others.
Okay, so moving on to part 3. We're going to talk about navigating relationships and leadership through questioning.
Okay.
And one of the biggest challenges in any workplace is dealing with difficult colleagues.
Ah, yes. Everybody has at least one.
And the book talks about diversity, but in a broader sense than we usually think about it.
What do you mean?
It's not just about accepting people from different backgrounds. It's about accepting people who have different values and ways of thinking.
So it's about respecting different perspectives.
And it encourages us to approach those difficult colleagues with tolerance.
Tolerance.
Yeah, try to understand where they're coming from, why they see things the way they do.
So ask yourself what might have led them to this perspective.
And what's really interesting is that the book calls for a broader perspective overall.
Broader perspective.
Yeah, it's about trying to see things from a higher vantage point.
Like rising above the situation.
And it emphasizes the importance of respecting even those colleagues who are difficult.
Even the difficult ones.
Because if you don't respect them, it might mean that you think you're better than them.
Oh, that's a good point.
And the book even mentions this concept from Adler about equal relationships.
Equal relationships.
Yeah, where you treat everyone with respect and you don't try to be superior to anyone.
That's a good foundation for any relationship.
Okay, so for those of you who are moving into leadership roles for the first time, the book offers some advice.
Okay.
It says that before you can inspire others, you need to understand yourself.
Understand yourself.
Yeah, like what are your strengths and weaknesses?
So self-awareness is important.
And they suggest taking some time to reflect on your past work experiences and figure out what skills and qualities you bring to the table.
Like a self-assessment.
And then they recommend talking to people you trust and respect.
Like mentors or former bosses.
Exactly, and ask them what they think makes a good leader.
So actively seek out advice.
And here's something that I think is really reassuring for new leaders.
What's that?
The book says that you don't have to be super charismatic to be a good leader.
You don't have to be charismatic.
There are lots of different leadership styles. And what matters is finding a style that works for you.
So play to your strength.
And they give examples of leaders who are good at delegating or who focus on setting clear goals and then letting their team run with it.
So it's about finding your own approach.
And Sataki actually talks about how he observed his own bosses and he saw things that he didn't think were efficient.
He didn't agree with their methods.
So he actually started planning his own leadership style in advance.
Wow, so he was thinking about it even before he was in a leadership position.
And then when he became a leader, he was able to implement his own style.
That's impressive.
Okay, so another challenge that leaders face is dealing with team members who don't seem to be listening.
Ugh, that's frustrating.
And the book says that before you get upset, you should ask yourself, am I communicating clearly?
Am I explaining things properly?
Because sometimes the problem is with the leader, not the team.
So take a step back and assess your own communication.
And they use this analogy of a contractor and a subcontractor.
Okay.
The contractor has to give clear and specific instructions to the subcontractor.
Otherwise, the job won't get done right.
And they even suggest having your team members write down the instructions.
Just to make sure everyone's on the same page.
And active listening and communication are so important for leaders.
Yeah, you have to be able to listen to your team.
And the book recommends scheduling regular one-on-one meetings with your team members.
Regular check-ins.
And ask them specific questions about what's going well, what challenges they're facing.
So be proactive about getting feedback.
And also ask them about their career aspirations.
So show that you're invested in their development.
And they even suggest that you might want to start with your more junior team members.
Why is that?
Because they might be more likely to give you honest and unfiltered feedback.
Oh, that makes sense.
And they also talk about how to deal with personal issues that might be affecting someone's work.
That's a tricky one.
It is. And the book recommends being supportive, but also maintaining professional boundaries.
So be understanding, but also firm.
And the book also addresses this tendency that some leaders have to micromanage.
Oh, yeah, the control freaks.
And they argue that leaders shouldn't try to be player coaches.
Player coaches?
Yeah, meaning they shouldn't try to do everything themselves.
What's a delegate?
Exactly, because the leader's primary responsibility is to develop their team and help the organization grow.
It's about empowering others.
And if you try to do everything yourself, your team won't have the chance to learn and grow.
That's true.
And Sasaki shares some of the typical expectations that companies have for section chiefs.
Like what?
Like setting the overall direction, guiding their subordinates, making sure that things are reported properly, and building relationships outside the team.
So it's a lot more than just doing the work yourself.
And he encourages people to create their own leader's task list.
So be organized and strategic.
And there's this really interesting story about a deputy section chief who was very capable, but also a little overconfident.
Oh, I know that type.
And they decided to move him to an overseas position.
Even though he was doing well where he was?
Yeah, because they wanted to push him out of his comfort zone and help him grow.
It was a long-term investment in his development.
And it worked, even though senior management was initially hesitant.
So sometimes you have to make tough decisions to help people grow.
And finally, in terms of leadership, the book talks about how to deal with team members who are consistently underperforming.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
And they say that the first thing you should do is make a genuine effort to help them.
Give them support and guidance.
But if they're not improving and they're negatively impacting the team, then you might have to make a difficult decision.
Like transfer them or let them go.
And they recommend talking to your own superiors about this. And they caution against being too lenient.
Because that can hurt the whole team.
And Sasaki talks about how he had to transfer a capable but uncooperative employee to a different department.
Where his lack of teamwork wasn't as much of a problem.
And the point is that leaders need to be both kind and firm.
Yeah, it's about finding that balance.
Okay, so Part 4 focuses on balancing work and personal life through inner questioning.
Okay.
And a question that a lot of people struggle with is how to prioritize family versus work.
Yeah, that's a constant struggle.
And some people even think about quitting their jobs to focus on their families.
Especially women.
But the book strongly advises against quitting, especially for women.
Me too.
Because it can have a huge financial impact in the long run.
Oh, yeah.
They cite some research from Japan that shows how much less women earn over their lifetimes if they leave the workforce even for a few years.
Wow.
And it's also really hard to get back into the workforce as a permanent employee after you've taken a break.
It's like starting all over again.
And they also caution against relying solely on your partner's income because you never know what might happen.
Yeah, things change.
So it's important for women to maintain their financial independence and their careers.
I agree.
And the book also challenges traditional gender roles in the home.
Traditional gender roles.
Yeah, like it strongly advocates for men being more involved in childcare and housework.
So equal responsibility.
And they even suggest that women can kind of coach their husbands in doing more around the house.
Like train them.
And the point is that it should be a true partnership with open communication about everyone's needs.
Yeah, that's so important.
And they encourage women to pursue their careers and not let societal expectations or the burden of childcare hold them back.
Go for it.
Okay, so when it comes to relationship difficulties, the book encourages you to first look at yourself.
Look at yourself.
Instead of just focusing on your partner's flaws.
It's easy to blame the other person.
But they suggest taking some time to remember why you chose to be with your partner in the first place.
Remember the good times.
And even make a list of their positive qualities.
So focus on the good.
And the idea is that nobody's perfect, and we all have our flaws.
So be realistic.
And Sasaki talks about how he went through some tough times in his own marriage.
Oh, yeah.
And he realized that he was focusing too much on his wife's problems.
Instead of trying to understand her.
And he started trying to see things from her perspective.
That's empathy.
And he even recommends following this advice from Stephen Covey, which is to seek first to understand, then to be understood.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that.
And a really key element for long-term relationship success, according to the book, is respect.
Respect.
Even more so than romantic love.
Wow, that's interesting.
Because even in relationships that are going through hard times, there are usually things that you can admire about your partner.
If you look for them.
And then they talk about the importance of effective communication.
Communication is key.
And they emphasize active listening, which is more than just waiting for your turn to speak.
It's about really hearing what the other person is saying.
And they encourage you to put aside your own emotions and preconceptions and really try to understand your partner's point of view.
It's about seeing things from their side.
And when you're feeling overwhelmed by work and family life, the book offers some practical advice.
Okay.
It says to prioritize taking breaks.
Take breaks.
Even if it's just for a few minutes.
Yeah, sometimes you just need to step away.
And if possible, get help with childcare or housework.
Don't try to do it all yourself.
And if your health is really suffering, they even suggest considering taking a temporary leave from work.
A leave of absence.
Because your health is the most important thing.
Nothing is worth sacrificing your health for.
And they also suggest giving your children space to figure things out on their own.
Don't hover.
And Sasaki talks about how when his son was being bullied at school, he took a proactive approach.
What'd he do?
He talked directly to his son's classmates to try to address the issue.
That's brave.
And then when it comes to dealing with difficult family members,
Oh, boy.
like if they're financially irresponsible or unmotivated or demanding,
Yeah, those are tough situations.
the book suggests treating them as independent individuals.
Not just as relatives.
And again, they mention Adler's principle of equal relationships and the importance of respecting boundaries.
So give them space.
And they recommend having calm and honest conversations with them instead of nagging or criticizing.
So talk to them like adults.
And really listen to what they have to say.
Listening is so important.
And Sasaki shares his own experience with his son, who took 7 years to graduate and had trouble finding a stable job.
Oh, wow.
But he was patient and supportive, and eventually his son found success.
So sometimes you just have to give people time.
And finally, when it comes to dealing with difficult parents,
Parents.
the book suggests that their behavior might be coming from a place of not understanding adult relationships.
So they're not necessarily trying to be difficult.
And they encourage you to try to see your parents as regular people who make mistakes.
Not just as authority figures.
And try to forgive them for their unintentional mistakes.
Because holding on to resentment can be harmful.
And Sasaki talks about his close relationship with his mother and how he supported her decision to remarry.
Even though his brothers were against it.
And the point is that recognizing that older people aren't always wiser and that children aren't always less capable can really improve those parent-child relationships.
That's a good insight.
Okay, so part 5 is all about the power of written communication and expression.
Written communication.
And when you're having trouble talking to a family member directly, they suggest writing a letter.
A letter.
Because sometimes it's easier to express yourself in writing.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to find the right words to say out loud.
And Sasaki shares a very personal story about how he wrote a letter to his daughter after she attempted suicide.
Oh, wow.
And in the letter, he expressed his love and support for her.
That's beautiful.
And he emphasizes how powerful written words can be.
Yeah, letters can have a lasting impact.
And he also talks about how when he was away for work, he and his family would write letters to each other.
So they stayed connected through writing.
And he says that even if you live in the same house, writing letters for special occasions can be really meaningful.
Like birthday letters or anniversary letters.
And to encourage self-expression and communication skills in their family, they had this tradition where the kids would give short speeches on their birthday.
Birthday speeches.
And it gave them a chance to share their dreams and goals, and it helped them get better at expressing themselves.
That's a cool tradition.
So to sum up this deep dive, we've explored how powerful it can be to ask yourself the right questions.
Yeah, inner questioning.
And how asking the right questions can help you in all these different areas of life, at work, in your relationships with your family.
It's a tool for growth.
And we've talked about the importance of self-reflection, learning from others, thinking strategically, communicating empathetically, and expressing yourself both verbally and in writing.
That's a lot to think about.
And as you requested, this whole deep dive has been focused on giving you practical ways to use the ideas from Sasaki's book.
So hopefully you can apply this to your own life.
And here's a final thought for you to consider. Is there any area of your life where you've been avoiding asking yourself some tough questions?
That's a good question.
Maybe it's about your career or a relationship or your long-term goals.
Yeah, those can be hard to face.
But sometimes just taking the time to think about the right questions, that can be the first step towards making positive changes.
It's about being honest with yourself.
And that can lead to a deeper understanding of yourself and the world around you.
That's a great way to end this deep dive.
Thanks for joining us.
It was my pleasure.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.